Friends, great to be with you. Welcome to this special celebration of the new book, Releasing Our Burdens, a guide to collective, ancestral, and individual healing. We're here with Thomas Hübl, Dick Schwartz, and we have a special guest joining us, Fatimah Finney. Let me tell you just a little bit more by way of background. Dick Schwartz is the founder of Internal Family Systems, IFS, an evidence-based therapeutic model that depathologizes our multi-part personalities. He's currently on the faculty of Harvard Medical School, and his IFS Institute offers training for professionals and the general public. We're here with Thomas Hübl, teacher, author, and international facilitator, who integrates the core insights of the great wisdom traditions with the discoveries of modern science. Since the early 2000s, Thomas has been leading large-scale events and courses that focus on the healing and integration of trauma. He's worked with tens of thousands of people worldwide through workshops and multi-year training programs, and he's the author, with Sounds True, of a book on healing collective trauma. Special guest joining us, Fatimah Finney, an intercultural competence consultant, a level 3 trained IFS therapist and trainer at the IFS Institute. Fatimah is a serial goal setter, a lover of new ideas, an imaginative thinker, and Fatimah is responsible for a chapter in the new book, Releasing Our Burdens, Chapter 4, Racism, Social Location, and Trauma, a very powerful segment of the new book. Thomas, Fatimah, Richard, welcome to all three of you.
Thank you, Tami.
Thank you, Tami.
Here to enter us into the conversation. Let's begin, Dick, if it's okay with you, as a way to sort of set the stage and bring us all together, a practice from IFS that can really be our on-ramp before we start our dialogue together.
Happy to do that, Tami. And first, I want to just say how thrilled I am that we're finally launching this book. It's been a labor of love for me. Just so enjoy collaborating with you and Thomas through this whole process, and so honored that Fatimah could join us in the book. So really glad we're doing this. And yeah, in terms of an IFS-based meditation, let's all just take a second and focus inside and notice what's going on back there behind the scenes. So you're going to notice what thoughts are happening, what kind of emotions, sensations, impulses, and as you notice all that activity, I'm going to invite you to imagine that each of those are emanations from different parts of you, from different subpersonalities. So it's like there's a little collective inside of you that are having all kinds of conversations and emotions. And for now, just kind of greet them. Let them know you see that they're here. And even if you don't know them very well, for now, see if you can welcome them. All these different parts of you with all their different opinions and beliefs and feelings. And as you do that, you might notice that you are able to separate from them a little bit. Instead of being what we call blended, now you're noticing them. So you're a little bit separate. Maybe you feel a little more space in there. And from that more spacious place, if you get there, see if you can also extend some compassion to these parts, even the ones that bother you usually. Letting them know that you get that they're trying to protect you, even if it backfires. And some of you will find that as you do this, it'll seem like these parts are relaxing a little more. So there's even more space in your body and your mind. And if that's true, then you're also accessing more of what we call yourself with a capital S, which is your essence, really. And it's just beneath the surface of these parts, such that when they unblend or separate, you automatically get more access to it. And then for purposes of this seminar, maybe just ask these parts if anybody carries energy that doesn't belong to you. Does anybody carry beliefs, emotions, energies that came from somebody else? And whenever the time feels right, you can begin to shift back out here. But thank your parts for whatever they let you do in there. And then come on back.
Thank you, Dick. I also wonder if here at the beginning of our conversation, Dick, if you could share a little bit about the origin of your collaboration with Thomas and Fatimah's involvement in the creation of the new book and how all this came to be.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. So I had been working with what I call parts, which we had a little taste of a second ago, for a number of years, and finding that part of why they were extreme in people was because they carried what we call burdens, which are extreme beliefs and emotions that came into you during a trauma, maybe in your life, and attach to these parts and then drive the way they operate. And as I was exploring all of that and trying to find out how can we help these parts unburden, release these extreme beliefs and emotions, stumble around and found some practices that facilitate that, one of which includes what we call witnessing. So if I was working with you, Tami, and you were focused on a young part of you, I was learning also that these parts are frozen in time. They're stuck in the past, and that they need to feel like you get what happened back there and how bad it was. So I would have you ask that younger part of you what it wanted you to know about where it was stuck in the past and what happened. And you start to see scenes from your childhood, perhaps. And we do that until the part feels like you get what happened and how bad it was. And as I was doing that, down the road, people started seeing scenes that clearly weren't from their lives, but in fact were from their ancestors' lives, from their, not even necessarily their parents, but from sometimes many, many years earlier. And that the part that they were carrying, or the burden they were carrying, came from a trauma that happened long time before. And so we began calling those legacy burdens in contrast to what we call personal burdens that happened to you in your lifetime. And, as I was working with that, sometimes ancestors would show up and want to be witnessed to. And so all of that was intriguing to me, and I hadn't really thought about it before. But I became more and more interested in this concept of legacy burdens and how to unload them. And as I did that, it became more and more clear that it isn't just individuals that carry them, that some of the derivation of these legacy burdens came from large systemic collective events that happened to ethnic groups, that happened to countries, and that were more collective. And so I became very interested in how could we work with large groups with this. And about that time, I started hearing about Thomas's work and how parallel it was to where I was with what I'm talking about, and how he had actually done that with very large groups of over 1,000 people at a time. And so my memory is that I reached out to him just to compare notes and see if we could collaborate. And that's been a wonderful collaboration so far. And as we played with this book idea, it was clear that two white guys can't cover all the legacy burdens we need to. And Fatimah is a trainer in our organization and a really talented IFS therapist, and had a lot of experience with legacy burdens of people of color. And so I'm so honored that she was willing to write a chapter on that too. So that's my memory of the onset of this book.
Very good. I'm going to ask you all an opening question that I think could cover a lot of ground. My goal is to introduce and touch on just some of the ideas that are in the book, Releasing Our Burdens. In the short time that we have, we're not going to be able to go into a lot of depth, but I think we could try to share some of the framework, some of the territory that the book explores. So here's the opening question. And Dick, you already pointed to it in this notion that there are legacy burdens, burdens from our ancestors, burdens that we've inherited from the collective. And I actually think that people have a level of awareness, actually, of their legacy burdens that they're carrying. The part that becomes more mysterious, and it's like, what, how do I do this, is how to move from that awareness to a full release from our nervous system. If you even see it that way, a sense of, oh, I'm not being run by this burden anymore. And Dick, you mentioned the unburdening process. You called it the unloading process. And I think this is where a lot of the questions come up. I know I have these legacy burdens, ... what now? So I wonder if we could share how you each view that process.
I'll let you go first, Thomas.
Well, yes, thank you. And thank you, Tami, for this lovely hosting. And thank you, everybody, Fatimah and Richard. Warm welcome from my side also. And yeah, I think you said it, like, first of all, I want to echo what Dick just said about coming together and finding somebody that is interested to play in these three dimensions, individual, ancestral, and collective. And Tami, to your question, in my experience, I have a little bit of a different language than Dick has, but I think it's very similar in essence and a bit different in the languaging. So when many people say I'm aware of my legacy burdens, what they say, they know that they have some, but it's very hard to feel sometimes that we have to. We feel a lot of symptoms, but we don't feel the real what I call ancestral trauma. And I think if what Dick just did before in the meditation, that we become aware of something, and the witnessing itself creates already like a little bit of a space that I can sense and feel, but with more conscious awareness. And I think this is the first step. And the second step is that we get to know these parts that we inherited in a way from the former generations deeper and develop a relationship. And if that relationship works out well, and maybe even in our case, we work on this very much in big groups, in relational settings, then we can together bring those more into our awareness and see what's needed that can be released. And so there's like a step-by-step process, but I think the differentiation between I know that my grandparents went through the Second World War to, oh, I can feel more in myself how that feels and create a relationship to those parts or those aspects, that is, I think, a very big change factor. And from then on, I think healing can happen. So from mental to a kind of a sensing awareness is a big step. And maybe, Fatimah, you want to add to that also more from your side?
Yeah, I was right there with you in thinking of the question as people may know it cognitively, but there's a knowing that goes beyond how we think about these burdens. And I invite people who want to know that step between I know what the burden is to how does it function and why does it make sense that it's there to begin with? Because many burdens, when they're passed down from parents, especially ones around survival, there's a reason that they're there. And for people to have patience in some way, right? So the witnessing, the getting to know, the understanding it is really important in order for anything to be released. So I would say when you know it, how do you know it at a deeper level than just understanding it cognitively? And then can you be with the why as to how it got there to begin with before doing anything else with it in terms of releasing and any of the methods that we do to do that.
So shall I add to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, please. And also just to say, I'm with you in tracking this progression, but I want to move to the place of freedom too, the release part. So I hope we get there. I hope we don't just leave people, with in terms of our mapping at the feeling of it and stewing in that. But then there's yet more to be unfolded, I presume.
Yeah, if we were great marketers, we'd say, read the book, right?
That's right. Leave them hanging on the cliff of feeling their trauma. Bye, guys. Got to go.
Yeah, so as both these guys said, you find the part that carries the legacy burden in your body. And once you do that, you shift out of your thinking mind. And then as you get open to it and curious about it, you start to learn where if you just ask, often you'll get scenes from where it came from, and sometimes the very deep past. During the meditation, I asked that question of ask your parts if anybody carries somebody else's energy. And that's one way to find legacy burdens, because parts can tell you, this doesn't belong to me. I got this from somebody else, and they can even identify where they got it. So you you focus on the part that does carry that. And then witnessing is often a piece of it. Sometimes there isn't any knowledge of where it came from. It's just knowledge that it's somebody else's, it's not mine. And then the next question often is, ask this part if it likes having to carry this. And many parts will immediately say, no, but I didn't think I had a choice, or no, but I have to, because my people suffered, so I have to suffer too, or we can't forget what happened and I carry all these memories to do that, or I have to carry the fear to be hypervigilant so it never happens again. So there's a whole variety of reasons why parts are reluctant to unload legacy burdens. And over time, we've learned ways to address those fears, sometimes actually bringing in the ancestors. Like I would just say, Tami, could you invite the people who've suffered to come in, and their spirits will show up, and ask them if they need you to carry this for them. And more often than not, the ancestors say, no, you don't have to carry this for us. But there's a variety of other ways to help parts understand that they don't need this, even though it came through their lineage, that they don't have to carry this. And it actually, this incredible fear or this these beliefs about the world actually are damaging to their own bodies. And so once a part agrees with that and agrees that it doesn't want to carry it anymore, then we can send it out. And the unburdening process involves, for us anyway, which I borrowed from shamanism, asking the part if it wants to give it up to, and then a menu of the elements: light, water, fire, wind, earth, anything else. And the part might pick light. And so have the light shine on the part and tell it to just let all this, and parts can tell you where it sits in their body. So let all that dark cloud that's in your chest, just let it go into the light. And as people do that, they feel much lighter. That's the most common word. And that's a legacy unburdening. And then we can also invite ancestors, which again, we borrowed from shamanism, to come in and share in the collective unburdening of your ancestry, if they're so inclined, if they carry it anymore. So how's that?
I think that's terrific from the IFS model. Thomas, I'm curious, with the work that you've done with large groups of people, what you've found as a process that works.
Yeah, as I said, we use a bit of a different language. So we would say, I would say, like when we look at trauma, like it's always suppressed elements that couldn't be experienced when the during the experiences and the wars or whatever was that past, and has been shut down or frozen. So that frozen past, as Dick said, lingers or resides in our individual or collective subconscious. So what we do is we become actually the ones that are living now. We become aware, we extend our awareness into the depth of the permafrost or the frozenness. And this is true for like ancestral legacy burdens, as Dick would say, or this is also true in my experience when we talk about the collective dimension. So when we become aware of a kind of a collective trauma field, what we become aware first of is like the defense mechanism against that pain. And if we don't pathologize that, but if we really create an interest in the relationship to that defense mechanism, the collective suppression of pain in different countries or different parts of our society, then it shows itself that then the information or the experience can literally come up because we change our relationship to it. That's true when I don't want to see what my grandfather did. I'm part of keeping this down. So when I change my relationship, it doesn't mean that I did that, but I create a relationship to what has happened in my grandfather's life, and that might allow information to come up, be seen, be felt, and then also move on. Like emotions, they come, they have a peak, and they subside. They're not supposed to stay here. But if we freeze them, they stay. And my experience was in different cultural contexts around the world, when large groups come together, and we do this with collective legacy burdens, as Dick would say, or Fatimah would say, then these can come into our awareness. So the group actually becomes like a little bit like a pond, and that pond reflects the information that we cannot see with our regular eyes. We know the history, but we don't have the sensing experience of that. And if we allow it, we can learn from that frozen past. And then we will call this post-traumatic learning, or then there's integration, learning, and insight that comes from it. And that's how we process the unprocessed past and grow and mature individually, ancestrally, or collectively. We become wiser as a culture.
Yeah. As I'm listening to both of you, the sea of courage comes to mind, because it takes courage to look at the things that we don't want to look at, or that we've been conditioned not to look at, or to put under the rug. And so as people are thinking about how to release burdens, how to release legacy burdens, it does take courage, or recognizing, is this a time in my life when I can take a look at this? And then also the importance of community. So whether that is, I do a lot of one-to-one work, so I'm working with clients and being that community for them as they do this work individually, but also how to really think about, if you don't feel like you have the courage to look at it by yourself, looking into who can I do this with, right? Who are the people that can sit with me as I try to speak the unspeakable and go to places that maybe family, maybe culture have said, don't speak about this, it's in the past, leave it where it is.
Thank you, Fatimah, for bringing up this phrase, the sea of courage. I really like that. I like the sea part of it too, the oceanic kind of part of here I am. And one of the ways that that really came up for me in reading Releasing Our Burdens had to do with the sections on collective trauma and the ways we often defend ourselves against the traumas that have happened in our nation's history, the land that we live on. And you make some really interesting points about how we can look at the collective journey and the individual journey, not just as interdependent, but that there are parallels when it comes to the trauma healing process. And I wonder if you can share more about that, how countries heal from traumas of genocide, slavery, other deeply embedded historical traumas that many of us, wade into it. I'm lost in this ocean. I don't know. How can I be part of that healing?
You asking any of us?
Yeah, all of you. Okay. Any and all.
So yeah, I'm very much into the parallels, and it's remarkable how much you explore this internal family in a person and how much it reflects external families, but also much larger systems, and that I can look at a country, and we could look at the United States, and you see huge numbers of exiled people living paycheck to paycheck and exiled for racist reasons, and so on and so on. And just like an individual who has a lot of exiles, there's going to be a lot of pain in the country and a lot of fear that requires a lot of protective parts to suppress, as Thomas is talking about. And so in our government, we have a lot of those people, and they take on similar kinds of roles that we see in the inner world. So there are these manager protectors who make it so we don't have to look at our histories, and there are firefighter protectors who are very reactive and distracting in various ways. So yeah, it's all very parallel. And in our inner work, we're trying to access the self of the individual, who then begins to work with all these parts. And similarly, when Thomas gathers 1,000 people together and can access what I'll call the self of that larger group, which groups have a self, which we both agree with, then people, that brings up their individual selves more. It's kind of contagious for that capital S self in us. And that, I love the SEA and the C word, courage, emerges, and people can go to these places. And as Thomas says, once you collectively see what there is this kind of magical process that happens when you get that much self in one room. And I've never done groups as large as Thomas, but I've done several hundred people focused on the same legacy burden at times, and sometimes any legacy burden they want to work with. But the power of that community or collective doing it together is really remarkable.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Dick. And also, like, I think one element that needs to also be mentioned is that we have been born into a world that was already hurt to a certain degree before we were born. So we grew up in a world that taught us through our parents, our grandparents, other people, teachers, politicians, society. We learned from partly hurt or traumatized people and their symptoms. And so that's so ingrained in our nervous system that the conditioning that we've got also makes it harder to see it. That's why there's such a discrepancy often between, oh, I know the history, I learned history at school or university, I understand what happened. But the filters and the suppression mechanism in the society, which at the time of real pain is super intelligent, that's the best we could do as a society for ourselves, to suppress some of the pain, to go through that hardship better. But then eventually, of course, it creates a lot of symptoms. And so maybe often 1 or 2 generations later, when we have more space, we can say, okay, and I see this, there are many people around the world that say, yeah, we feel this somehow, but we don't know what to do with it. And then if we come together and create spaces where that slowly and in a titrated way can come up, and we create a lot of what Dick calls like generation of self or coherence building in a group, and then by itself, when it's safe enough and we have the right ingredients in the room, then the nervous system in the room, the collective nervous system, wants to detox that, because to hold it takes more energy than to release it in a safe space and grow and build more soil. And as you said, Tami, beautifully before, like you talked about the land, and I believe the trauma that we carry is kind of a disconnect from the land. And the more we heal it, we actually become more and more one with the land again. And the land in our body, the land as our body, but also the land and the natural resources are like felt intimately and more than seen on Excel sheets, like objectively. So it actually reconnects us to a different relationship with the planet, the planetary resources, each other, spirit. So it's a very profound work. I've seen amazing changes in people over the years. But I hand it back to you, Fatimah.
Yeah, so much to say. What you said around the disconnect from the earth is being important. I think there's also been a disconnect from each other over time, and the need for superiority really blocks people from being able to one, feel their own pain and heal their own trauma, but then it creates outward distraction. If I'm so focused on being better than you, then I don't have to look inside with what's driving me for the need to feel better at all. And so to the question of the parallels, the individual healing and the collective healing, I hold, and this comes from, really my faith perspective, and then also I see it having been in the IFS community of remembering that everything is connected, that we are connected to the earth, that we as people are connected despite the different messages of division, whether it's racial, whether it's around gender. And when we go to these safe spaces, whether it's an IFS training or it is a retreat that you're doing, Thomas, it is a way for people to almost turn off the noise to get the healing that they need to hopefully then do something when they leave. I know I think about people, and this really gives me hope that sometimes when you're just around one person that really seems to have a light about them, that has a way about them, that they care about people, or you just can't even name it. But when you're around them, you feel like you're a better person. And perhaps those who are listening have had that experience. That's an experience where one person can really transform a room and invite everyone to their better selves, their true selves, their authentic self. And when we're able to recognize that sometimes it could take one person to transform a room of 30 or a room of 500, then the hope of that can be, quite inspiring. The issue is that it can happen in the same way, that it can take one person to really downgrade the experience of a group of people, that can really turn people off. And so we're inviting people with this book, with the messages, with these two modalities of how do we, as we walk the earth, be an invitation for anyone around us back into the light, back into our authentic selves, just by way of us showing up. And I think that's the bridge between the individual and the collective, when we're all working on how am I connected to my own self? And as I walk the earth, does my being, does my example invite others into themselves? And I think we'll be in a better place.
One thing I keep reflecting on is something that you introduce in the very first paragraphs of Releasing Our Burdens. This sentence, there's no such thing as individual health, that our health is always part of an interdependent system. Individual, yes, but also ancestral and collective. And I thought to myself, God, so much of the way that I've focused on healing in my life has been, me and my therapy appointments and blah, 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 my family. And yeah, I get these other factors, but I'm still at the center doing my kind of individual thing here, trying to get better. And I'm curious how each of you see when you really take that to heart, when you really take that in, there's no such thing as individual health, how it actually changes your view and how you live.
Okay, I'll go first. Well, let me just say I've been incredibly impressed with the power of some of these legacy burdens to make you sick, but also to color your view of the world. And I'm convinced that most of the wars and big conflicts in the world are the product of these legacy burdens. And I'm also amazed that once people are willing to unload those legacy burdens, both their health improves, but also their view of others changes dramatically. And we could do an exercise where you think of an enemy and you look at that person and they look monstrous. And then we find the part that sees them that way and find especially if it's an ethnic enemy or something. And then you have the part that sees them monstrously step back and even without unloading its legacy burden, have them look through the eyes of self and they see an entirely different person. And they see past their opponent's protectors and they see the pain that drives that person, they have compassion. And I describe one of those sort of cases in the book. And so in terms of your question, a lot of things are going to stay ill or sick, both internally and externally, until we can get to some of this and actually unload it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also think that I think it's good to see that maybe one outdated thing in the postmodern thinking is that individuals are kind of like separate particles. When in fact we wouldn't have this conversation without the air that we are breathing, at least not longer than a few minutes, and then without the trees that or the plants or whatever the algae that take care of us having these moments of depth and being alive. And so, when from there you take it deeper, you look at every child, every defense mechanism of a child is always ecosystemically relevant and the most intelligent thing that the child can do in the challenging moments in this ecosystem. When that person then works on a team or is in an organization or creates their own family, that defense mechanism or that kind of behavior is ecosystemically relevant. So co-designs the ecosystem. If that ecosystem is very conscious and aware, then it will maybe be a healing movement to restore that. If not, then it will just have maybe more destructive effects on that team. And so when we look at it, and even for some time we thought, okay, let's throw all this plastic out there. Where did it end up? In our brain. So like this idea, that outdated idea that individuals are separate from the planet, from the land, from each other, from spirit, like from all the resources, is actually really not true. And I think we are slowly shedding the layers of separation that have been put into, like as filters into our way of perceiving, that we see, wow, we are actually much more interconnected. And also what Fatima said before, like it's about of course my individual health is important, but it's very much also interconnected with the ecosystems I create. And if I'm creating healthier ecosystems, my health is not just in me but also around me, and it's around Tami, it's around Dick, it's around Fatima. And so we all are actually walking interdependence ecosystems, and many people that we meet are co-creating those with us. And I think that version also for health is very important, like that we expand a bit the way how we look at health in individuals. And as Dick, you said before, this trauma patterns are disorganized information flows. So the inform, how we come into a form, is very much dependent on how information flows through us. And what is relating? Information in movement. So if it's organized, then we feel close and intimate, and we can at least, or we can consciously disagree on things and have conflicts together, or they simply drive us apart. And so they make us feel more lonely. And that's why the the healing in collectives, I think, is so much more potent. And if we do one-on-one work in parallel, but we have those communities of healing, I think it accelerates, and at least in our groups, it always accelerates the individual healing by far, by far.
Mhm. When I think about that line, Tami, I feel like it's an invitation to go beyond the individual. When I think about toxic individualism, especially where I am in the United States, where so many people are conditioned to feel like it's just me here. I think about some of my clients who come in and don't even want to talk about family because they moved away or they are strange and they really feel as though my health is mine. I don't have to think about any of the systems that have shaped them. And so this line about there's no such thing as individual health is sort of a call of let's think about what are the things shaping your health, right? And Thomas, you mentioned the environments that people shape or choose around them and how that influences their health. Many people also have environments uh, that they didn't have a choice to be their reality. And so thinking about what are the contexts that led to my biological health, my relational health, my emotional health, and beginning to make those connections. And sometimes can be really freeing for people when they do think that it's just me and whatever the things that I did. But when we're like, oh no, like what you absorb from your family line, what you absorb from your work culture, what you absorb from your community, what you absorb from the country you immigrated from, and now what you're absorbing from the country that you're in, a lot of that can be a sigh of relief to know that, oh, it's actually not just about the individual choices I make. Rather, it's a both and. there's an interplay between the choices that I make, but then also what are the decisions that are being made around me that are influencing the air that I breathe, the type of food that I'm even able to engage in, the type of access to resources to a webinar like this. All of that shapes what people are able to do in terms of their own healing, or even what they know is possible for them.
Can I add one more
Fatima,
thing?
yeah, please go ahead, Dick.
Just that also that I'm convinced that as you unburden, even with an individual, there are ripples, that there's a field of these burdens and there's a field of self-energy around the planet. And that you're not just letting go of something individual, but actually, and then if you multiply that by collectively doing that, the ripples are much bigger. So that's part of what keeps me going, is that belief that every therapist that's listening to this, as they're doing that healing work in their office, they're having a much bigger impact.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to just take a moment to zero in on an aspect of the chapter, Fatima, that you wrote that's included in the book. Racism, Social Location, and Trauma is the name of the section. And one of the things you write is one of the ways racism continues to persist is through the avoidance of talking about it. How can we change something we don't acknowledge is there? And what I wanted to ask about is, from your experience, how we can bring more self-leadership to conversations about racism so that we can have them. And yeah, that's my question. More self-leadership to these discussions.
Well, sometimes just hearing the word racism takes people out, that it's hard to even engage with. So I would invite even the people who are listening now, just noticing what happened in your body, or what has happened in your body since Tami even named racism. Because at least here in the US, it is a topic that activates, what we call an IFS protectors or defenses. Right? Automatically, there's a sense of, whether you are a white person, a sense of defensiveness. Oh no, when racism is mentioned, I'm equated with a racist. You're a person of color, or you identify other ways. There's a sense of racism is being named here. Oftentimes when it is, if certain people in power aren't comfortable, then I'm usually the target. So people automatically get on guard just by the way of the word being mentioned. And we could say same thing for other isms. But I'll stick with racism here. When I think about what we can do with self-leadership, I really think about that C of clarity, right? And so I'm mentioning C's as in the letter C. The self-energy, we describe it as like 8 types of C's: courage, clarity, and 6 other ones. I think the C of clarity, in terms of the clarity of the history, clarity in terms of the function of racism and why it's been here, what function has it served for superiority, one group to be deemed more powerful, deemed better than the other. Can we get clear on why that has functioned? Why have people parts needed that? Why have people's parts continued to perpetuate that? And if we can be clear on that, oh, okay, there's a need to feel better. And so I'm going to make this other person or these group of people feel less than. Then we can kind of get to the burden of that. Something inside has never felt good enough, what have you. And when we're able to be clear on what we're talking about versus defending it, then I think we can have more compassion for the people who've been the recipient of racism, as well as the people who have been the perpetuator of it. I think oftentimes when racism is talked about, or methods for healing it, it really is talked about in a way where people want to flip the plot. All right, white people have been in dominance. Let's make it where they're now, the victims. And when I think about self-leadership and self-energy, it's more about how do we make sure that we are not recreating the same systems of oppression just by changing the cast members. And so I think getting clearly noticing what's happening in our bodies when we talk about things like racism, clear about the history and the truth of the function of racism, and then clear about our own power and our social location. Where do we sit currently in society that gives us power to help begin to alleviate it? And so when I think about this group here, you know, Dick and Thomas are conferred more power in your identities as white males, whether you want it or not, compared to me as a Black woman, a Black Muslim woman. And so when we understand our power, we want to make sure that we use all of it. Okay, I have more power, so I'm going to speak about this and make sure that other people have power, are aware of it, and are clear. And then also, I hold power with people who might never listen to anything that the two of you say, just because of those same identities, who say that there's nothing that you can tell them about racism, there's nothing that they can learn from you because you are a white man. And so how do I use my leverage for the ears that I might have more influence over, so that we all can be working for you know, anti-racist practices, really kind of reducing the impact of the isms in the world. And so I do think it takes all of us, but we have to recognize our power. And many of the words I said, dominance, power, racism, activates defenses in people. And I think that's sort of the biggest blocks, because people tend to get paralyzed and not want to do it. But when I think about self-leadership, I get hope of like, it's already in us. It's art. You don't have to go looking for this thing. It's already in us. So by being more present and sitting, what we need to actually change and create the world we want is here. But we have to be willing to be courageous to say, yeah, okay, I've been perpetuating this, or I've been doing nothing about it, or I've been too afraid to act. And I think with that, we can get closer and closer to where we want to be. A lot of
Actually,
And, you
words.
know, yeah, please go ahead.
I'll jump in for a second. So white supremacy is one of the legacy burdens that I've worked with groups of white people, actually. And a lot of times they're very liberal and no, we don't have any of that. And essentially what they've done, because if you grow up in the United States, you cannot not have white supremacy burdens inside. And so to be a good person, we tend to exile the part that carries that burden. And then it operates unconsciously. We're not even aware sometimes when we're being influenced by that racist belief. And so in groups of white people, simply having them first admit that that is in there, and then collectively go in and find that part that carries that racist belief that pops out every so often when they see a Black person, maybe, and then collectively unburden, I think is one answer to how do we become less of a racist culture.
And I was just going to also bring Thomas into this conversation, because I think you have a very informed and intelligent approach in helping people when they encounter, it could be numbness or resistance or confusion, or like, oh my God, I'm freaked out right now, you know, or Dick said white supremacy, we're talking racism. I'm freaked out. And tell us a little bit more about how you help people relate to the freak out of whatever they might be experiencing in relationship to burdens and unburdening.
Yeah, thank you, Tami. And I want to underline, Fatima, also, you said it very beautifully. It's like immediately when it's being mentioned and we slow down a bit and we see, oh, I'm getting activated. Activated means I get more stressed, I'm more alert, what's going to happen now? Maybe I feel that I become more defensive. Or, so we show signs of hyperactivation, as we call it, an exaggerated stress state. Or we get triggered in the other way around, so we suddenly feel a bit distant, a bit indifferent. We lean out in a way. It's nothing to do with us. Kind of, we become a bit more numb without knowing that we are becoming. It says, oh, it's nothing to do with me. Or we suddenly feel that that's the strong version of it. But that we see that these both are, first of all, trigger moments. And in a way, Fatima, what you just did before is just to say, oh, when we mention that word, this might happen. That's a social awareness process for all of us to say, oh, how do I actually feel? And if I don't pathologize it, oh, I shouldn't be activated now, or I shouldn't be numb, then I can say, oh, I can become curious about these different states in me. And when I become curious, then I don't devalue that, but I see it as a necessary function in my whole inner world. And as Dick would say, there are some parts showing up that are protecting or managing or whatever they do. And so when we raise our awareness, and then we can have practices that reconnect us to what you called before self, like leading from self or self energy. And from there, I can create a different level of regulation in myself, so I can ground myself again. And then I have also more capacity when other people feel stressed in the space to really feel them and not to just keep them away. And when I engage in that way, it creates a warm environment. And that warm environment helps other people to calm down. And then we can really look at what got activated. Otherwise, we are too fast and we go into our mind and we keep arguing from a mental state when the thing we want to solve needs to go through our inner world and our embodiment. So we do a lot of work on, okay, let's depathologize this. Let's see how we can find a different regulation, and then be curious about these mechanisms and learn from them. And then I've seen many people that really change this kind of trigger states into learning, into growth. And that's really beautiful to see.
We're here talking about the new book by Dick Schwartz and Thomas Hübl. It's called Releasing Our Burdens, a guide to collective, ancestral, and individual healing. And the book includes segments where Dick takes people through several IFS exercises. Thomas, you take people through dialogues and inquiries and bringing forward the presence process that you teach. And Fatimah, you go through a dialogue exchange, IFS inspired, with someone in the book as well. It's a really beautiful, contemplative learning book to work with these practices. We've just touched on some of the points related to collective, ancestral, and individual trauma healing related to releasing our burdens here. Just touched on it. And as we end, Thomas, I wonder if you could take us into a brief integration practice of some kind to work with everything we've taken in here in this hour together.
Yeah, thank you, Tami. Yes, so let's just use the last couple of minutes to just take a breath and feel your body and just notice what's present inside as you listen to this conversation. And also we're listening to processes or aspects that live in us. It's not just talking about those, they're really in us, parts and burdens and self energy. So let's just notice how you feel after listening to this conversation, physically, emotionally. And let some of the seeds of this conversation where you say, oh, that's an interesting perspective, I noticed this in myself, let that just drop a bit deeper into your body, as if your body was the soil, and maybe some insights or some new perspectives are the seeds. And the seeds fall on the fertile soil of your experience so far. And for a few moments, just let your breath, your exhalations, take you into the parts of your body that feel warm. And and relatively safe and grounded. Connected. Maybe there's some pulsing, streaming. Places where you can be, like just rest in yourself. Maybe these places also have some inner space. More spacious. And then, with that deeper grounding, to take a couple of deeper breaths. And slowly come back to us on your screen. Thank you for your attention and the listening. And I hand it back to you, Tami.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for that integrating and grounding meditation. Thank you, Tami. Thank you, Dick. Thank you, Fatimah. We are just blessed and warmed by this special event. So thank you all. And also a very warm thank you to all of you for joining us and for participating and listening with your presence. Before we close, I'll share a few details about the book, where you can get it, how it's available. So the book is available for purchase in 3 different forms, including paperback, audio, and Kindle. And you'll find links to various booksellers on the webpage www.releasingourBurdens.com. If you're ordering from outside the US, please check with your preferred retailer in your country. And if you order a copy now, you'll also receive some free gifts, including guided practices from Dick and Thomas and more. And again, all of the information is on the webpage that you see on your screen now, www.releasingourBurdens.com. We hope you enjoy the book and that you've enjoyed our event today. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Goodbye for now.